Good afternoon. I'm Pat Whitlow. I'm with the Office of Nationally Competitive Awards here at the University of Kentucky. And I am just so delighted today to have 4 of UK's past Marshall Scholars who are going to talk to you about various aspects of the Marshall Scholarship. And so we have, well, I'll move straight to their, now the PowerPoint won't go naturally. Oh, there we go. So we have people from several different years who've gone on, and they're all have wildly different careers. And so Dr. Grant, as you can see, is a professor at University of Wisconsin-Madison. And I did not put all their institutions on, so maybe while they're talking, they may talk about that. Dr. Kasten, who was a 2002 Marshall Scholar and is also now the chair of the Chicago Regional Selection Commission. And Drs. Grant and Kasten are going to talk to you about the selection criteria that Marshall uses, and a little bit about if you get to be a finalist, what the interview looks like. And then I have Dalia Darge, who was our 2014 or 2015 Marshall Scholar, and she's going to talk about where she was in the UK and what her programs were like. And then we'll all congratulate Shemin because she is our newest Marshall Scholar, and she'll be leaving in the fall to pursue her degrees in London. So I'm delighted to have so many of our Marshalls to be able to speak to you about the varying experiences. I'm going to speak briefly about what it's like what our timeline is, because I think I'll just get that out of the way. I'll speak about it quickly. You can always ask me later, and it'll be on this recording. And then I'm going to give the vast majority of the time today to our Marshall Scholars. So just to let you know, I did check the Marshall website again today to be sure. The new application is not yet online, and they said they would open that up in early June, and they didn't give a specific date. But so you will have all summer. You can start working with me anytime. So you can reach out to me immediately, but early June through August is when you would probably be doing a lot of your work, because that is when the application opens in early June. Our campus deadline is tentatively September 1st. That's what it was last year, based on the Marshall deadlines. And because they're not out yet, or I haven't seen them, Dr. Kasten may know, I don't know exactly when it's going to be due. But you have to be nominated by your campus. And so I just want to make people aware, and that's why you go through the Nationally Competitive Awards office here. And I help arrange an interview with a faculty nomination committee for you. And we do that shortly after your applications come in September. I get them out to the faculty. We invite you in to do an interview. We've typically done those face-to-face, but Shemin, of course, helped us pilot the new process this year of doing them virtually. And with luck, we can go back to in-person in the fall, but we will see how things progress. And then if you are nominated by the faculty, you will have an opportunity to revise some of your materials based on their feedback. And then you'll submit it back to me, and we'll go in for the national deadline. Last year, that was September 25th for your parts of the application, and then your recommenders had until September 30th. So that's just a quick look at the timeline. And then I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Kasten and Dr. Marshall to talk about, just briefly, about eligibility, and then we have a slide for the various criteria. Dr. Kasten?
Yes, hi everybody. So I'm Jennifer. I'm happy to be here. I have my UK mug, which Pat gave me. So, you know, bribery works. That's one of the first things you should take away from this when we're talking about selection criteria. Bribery totally works. Right, so what Pat's put up here is the bare bones. If you don't meet these criteria, your application is automatically thrown out. Though, of course, this is just, again, the bare bones, and there's quite a lot on top that we're going to be looking for. So the first is that you need to be a citizen of the United States. I think even permanent residents, green card holders aren't eligible. You have to be a full citizen of the United States at the time of the application. The second is that you will be holding a 4-year degree by the time you take up the scholarship. Most people do apply when they're seniors in college, though you certainly can apply after graduation for a set interval of time. But you must have completed your 4-year undergrad degree by the time you would take up the scholarship. Next, we have a minimum GPA unweighted of 3.7. It would be a very extraordinary applicant with a 3.7 who was selected, to be frank, but that is the minimum. And as I said, you have a set window of time after college graduation where you are still eligible. So that usually is 3 years. So for this coming cycle, the 2021 fall, we're selecting scholars to go abroad in 2022. So you must have graduated from college no earlier than 2019. So there's a 3-year max window to take up the scholarship. And you can never have earned a degree in the UK. You can have studied abroad there just fine. You could have lived there just fine, but you cannot have earned a degree in the UK. So the number of scholarships is actually not fixed. It does fluctuate. It's kind of pegged a little bit to some of our partnerships, both in the universities as well as in the private donor space and the state of the endowment. But it's usually more, it's always more than 40. It says here up to 50, that would be the most that we've awarded, but it does fluctuate slightly. That is in contrast to the Rhodes Scholarship, which is fixed at 32. So this is the 3 big buckets of categories that I want you all to think about when you're crafting your application. The 3 main things on which we're looking at your applications through this lens, and we're scoring you when we interview you, are these 3. Academic merit, I think that's obvious, leadership potential, and ambassadorial potential. And I'll break those down. Academics, I think, again, is fairly obvious. We're looking for people who have absolutely excelled in their undergraduate studies. So people that, whatever you've chosen to major in, whatever field, and we're truly agnostic as to field. And we don't try to stack the deck and balance fields or anything like that. If we select 38 pure mathematicians, we select 38 pure mathematicians in a year. But you need to have really excelled. You need to be a leader, a thought leader. You need to have taken a huge breadth and depth of courses. You need to have done research. You need to have published. You need to have done high-level performance if you're a performance arts type major. If you're a computer scientist, you need to have written some really hip code. You know, something that shows that whatever you're doing it excellently. And again, I think most of us have been on this treadmill, on this hamster wheel since we were little, so we all understand academic merit. It's the latter 2 that really get people in knots. So we'll talk about those. Leadership. So leadership is actually very amorphously defined. It certainly doesn't mean that you founded 5 different organizations. And in fact, if you founded 5 organizations that haven't done anything and you've been pulled in 5 different directions, and as such, you just haven't accomplished very much, we don't look on that terribly favorably. If you've hitched your wagon to one particular organization that you didn't found, but you poured your heart and soul in it, and you've become a leader, and you've accomplished great things, we look very favorably on that. And leadership can also be seen kind of through an academic lens as well. So we actually look at research and published research. This is particularly true in the sciences, where it's much easier for an undergraduate student to have published something. If we see that you've been presenting at national meetings since you've been a junior in college, and that your papers are being cited, well, that's leadership. That's fantastic. It's very amorphously defined. And you can also look at it again through the lens of performance arts, through activism, through social justice work, through whatever it may be, political organizations, any of it. So be very broad in how you think of leadership, but also, you know, put this into your application and your essay about how you think other people are viewing you in this world. And then that comes to ambassadorial potential. So I know when I was applying, I had a really vague sense of how the Marshall Scholarship might be different from the Rhodes Scholarship. And I think we're very commonly compared to each other, right? Well, I knew the Rhodes is just at Oxford and the Marshall, you can go anywhere. I knew the Rhodes was founded by the Rhodes Trust from Cecil Rhodes's will. whereas the Marshall was founded as a thank you gesture to the United States from the British government for the Marshall Plan, the Economic Reconstruction Plan post-World War II. But that was all I knew. What I really didn't know is that as a Marshall Scholar, you are actually wielding a little bit of soft power. You're actually a diplomatic representative of the United States of America. And that's the lens through which we're seeing you here. So again, all of us, every single person in this country, I feel, tells some part of the American story. And so the question for you is, what part of the American story does your life represent? What part of this country are you going to represent when you go overseas? Why should this country, the United States, think you are a good representative? You do not need to suddenly, if you're not an economics or politics major or something, you don't need to bone up on the history of this special relationship and read like a bunch of Churchill diplomatic cables or something. We're not looking for that at all. We're looking for what I just said. What part of the American story do you tell? And are you someone whom we feel when we interview you can navigate these circles? Because as both Monica and Delia can tell you, and as Chimene is going to find out very soon, you are going to be put into some pretty high level scenarios. You're going to be in the Houses of Parliament. You're going to meet the Prime Minister. You're going to meet Prince Charles. He's our patron. You're going to be meeting diplomats. You're going to be meeting heads of state. You're going to be doing events for the rest of your life, if you're so inclined, at the local British consulates. You're going to be asked to represent the United States. And are you someone whom we can see doing well in that role? So like I said, it's very fair, it's very transparent. We recruit students from all backgrounds and we're agnostic as to your background and your discipline, but we're very interested in it in terms of what it says about you and how you might embody this scholarship when you go overseas. So I think Monica probably has some more to say about that.
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. So I was a 2000 UK graduate and was a 2000 Marshall Scholar, and I spent a year, actually both of my years in London. 1 year I did a master's at the LSE, and the second year I did a master's at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. I came back to the US, I got a PhD, and I've been working at the University of Wisconsin since 2009. And during a large part of my time at Wisconsin, I've both been on our university's internal selection committee, so working with our person who's just like Pat, to help our applicants sort of nurture their way towards the process. And then I've also been a member of the reading committee for the Chicago region since about 2010. There have been a few years I haven't served on the committee, but I've been on the committee, I think, more years than I haven't been on the reading committee that's there. And so I guess when I look at applications, I'm thinking about these 3 criteria that Jennifer was just talking about. Like, part of it is how you're narratively presenting yourself. So there needs to be some, when I look at an application, I'm looking for someone who has a coherent story, that this really, the program that you're applying to in the UK is the best possible program for you. So it's not just, this is an application, like just like any other application to go to graduate school, but you have to have a really compelling reason for me for why do you need to study this thing in the United Kingdom? And what is it about this program of study that you're proposing to do that's going to suit your needs better than it would be somewhere else? So when I read these applications, I think a really common comment that I put in the margins when I see them is, this person will be a great graduate student, but they're not necessarily a Marshall Scholar sort of contender because they're missing some part of that broader package that's there. And so particularly that really compelling reason why this is the ideal place and the ideal program for you to be pursuing that story. And I see part of that as being part of that ambassadorial potential, that part of the goal beyond just being sort of a diplomatic connection and a representative of the United States in the United Kingdom, you're also, there's a hope and an intention that you're going to continue those relationships and that you're going to continue not necessarily engaging with high levels of government, but that, I mean, as a demographer, that I will continue to engage with British demographers on a regular basis, that I continue that type of academic sort of translational aspect. And so is there something about the United Kingdom that is particularly pulling you and that is appropriate for your future path of study that's there? I also like look for people who sort of thinking about sort of what leadership means. I think Jennifer kind of hit the nail on the head of that. It's not just that like I was the president of every club I was in, but particularly like, have I been a thought leader amongst my friends? So sometimes you'll have people, it'll come out really clearly in their letters of recommendation that they were the person that everyone looked to for advice or guidance in the laboratory that they were working in, or they were the key problem solver, or they were the person who was the clear leader of the class discussion. And so that those come out in the letters in a supporting way, but then also finding a way to have that leadership it's hard to talk about that sometimes in your essay. And it's always, there's a weird disconnect that sometimes you see amazing people who are super humble in their essays and really undersell themselves and the leadership that they've been exhibiting. And then you see these letters and it's like you're looking at two different people where like all of this amazing potential that was there that they have, it's in the letters of recommendation, but it's missing from the person's own narrative of how they see themselves. And so I think on one of the earlier slides, Jennifer was talking about that I think the official guidance that they give us on the reading committee is that sort of some of this leadership potential is also sort of a sense of self-awareness that's present with that you're able to sort of see the bigger vision in what you're doing and sort of see not only sort of on the ground now as an undergraduate student, how you can be a leader in the environments that you're touching, but also how are you going to carry that forward to be a thought leader in your field moving into the future, and sort of what is your potential to really be really successful on the pathway that you're setting yourself out to be on. So sort of continuing that narrative arc that you're already starting and that you're describing yourself as being on in your essays, but like, where can we see that leading? And sometimes I think it's also when there's an element where you're talking about your future plans. And I feel like that small essay, many people just kind of brush it off, but there's a certain element that there's an expectation of ambition in those plans. And if your goal is to come back home and be a teacher in your hometown, like, that's not what the Marshall Scholarship wants to invest in. They want people who have a broader outward facing vision of their future, where they're going to be, maybe they will be a teacher, but they're also going to get really involved in state level education policy development, or they're going to be involved in sort of future teacher activism, and they're going to be involved in some way that's going to be bigger than just the sort of roles that they're taking on. And so having sort of giving the readers of your application a sense of where that's going, I think is really important. I'm just trying to think of I think those are the key things that I'm thinking of. And I think also just underlying that academic merit, not just that you're a great student. I mean, you're all great students, right? But that you have really been taking the greatest advantage of the opportunities that you have available to you, so that it's just sort of taken for granted that you're going to have been conducting research. You will be assumed you'll be standing out in a not good way if you're not writing a senior thesis. You should be sort of involved, and certainly the people who are in the sciences have a greater opportunity to be involved very early on in conducting research, but they also then have the disadvantage that because that's such a normative pathway in the sciences, they're expected to be the leader in the lab, performing on par with the graduate students in that laboratory often, in order to be a really competitive contender. Whereas people from the humanities and the social sciences, you may have fewer opportunities to be pursuing research. But the fact that you are working on a thesis and that you are sort of taking those extra steps really, I think, is also expected for people who are at the really competitive level for these scholarships. I think maybe I think that's sort of the three core points that I had to make. Do you want to add anything to that, Jennifer, about that more practical assessment?
I do, yeah. Thank you so much, Monica, because that's exactly, she nailed it too. This is the Mutual Admiration Society. Well done, Monica. Aren't you great? I'm going to talk a little bit about what not to do now in your application. So there's some things that are turnoffs, and we'll just go through them briefly. The first is the inverse of what Monica just said, which is arrogance. If we read an application that's just sort of dripping with hubris, where someone's basically saying they're the best thing since sliced bread, that doesn't come across terribly well. So be reflective. We are looking for character, and we're looking for people who have self-awareness, including humility and of their strengths and of their weaknesses. Another genre of essay which rarely succeeds is the essay that I call "It's So Hard Being Me." And again, you know, people have overcome the most unimaginable hardships in the Marshalls, and if that's your story, by all means discuss it. By all means, like I said, I want to know who you are, and I want to know what part of the American story that you're telling. But that's encouraged. But the "It's So Hard Being Me" is a bit whiny, and it's a bit, I deserve this scholarship. I've earned this scholarship because it's so hard being me. And try to stay away from that. Another is less egregious, but it would be kind of what I call the resume in prose essay, where you simply kind of enumerate all of the things that we can also gather from other parts of your application, where you're listing your leadership, or you're listing your hobbies and extracurriculars and awards and everything else. The essays in particular are meant to be, as Monica said, a narrative. They're meant to tie cohesively together your entire application, most definitely including your specific programs that you've picked out in the UK where you like to study. And then the last, which again is not so egregious, but it's this scholarship's really famous and really prestigious, so I'm going to apply for it. I don't have a really coherent reason why, other than it's really famous and really prestigious, and I would like to win it. Thank you very much. Those essays tend not to go very far either, and those applications, again, if you can't really point to why the UK makes sense for you for your graduate plans, it's going to be a difficult sell. The former chair of the Chicago committee had this wonderful little thought exercise, which I'm totally stealing, which is, he says, imagine that you're in the UK, you go to a pub, you sit down on the bar stool, next to you is a standard British taxpayer. I think Timothy's smiling because she was asked this question. The British taxpayer finds out that his taxes are funding your graduate degree. And he says, why? What are you going to tell them? Why are you a good investment for the British government? Why should they, and that's how the Marshall's funded. Why should they continue to allocate from Parliament funds for this program to pay for your graduate degree? If you can keep that as sort of the lens through which you write your essays, I think it comes across quite strongly.
I should unmute myself, but perhaps I should ask at this point, before we move on to Dahlia, if any students have any quick questions about those criteria. We can also do it at the end if you'd rather, but I was just going to see if anyone wanted to speak up. If not, then I'm going to go ahead and let Dahlia speak about her fairly recent experience of actually doing graduate study in the United Kingdom. And she did both of her degrees at University of Glasgow. So Dahlia, if you're ready, I will turn it over to you.
Yes, ma'am.
And let you talk about what it's like to go to school in the United Kingdom.
All right, so thank you all for coming out today. It's so good to see so many people interested in this amazing scholarship opportunity. And you know, as my mother said, when I was thinking of, you know, backing out and saying, you know, I'm not good enough, I come from a public university, or I don't know if I have what it takes, she's like, if you never do it, you will regret it the rest of your life. If you never submit that application, it will be a big regret that you will always look back on. And I'm really glad that she told me that at the time, because, well, here I am, Marshall Scholar. So my experience going to the UK, I did go over a little bit earlier than the rest of my class. So I missed some of the DC orientation. And that's just simply because Scotland starts a week earlier than the rest of the United Kingdom when it comes to university studies. So I needed to be there to sign in for my classes. Going to the University of Glasgow was like basically going to school in Hogwarts. I mean, you can kind of see in the picture behind me, the castle, that's kind of the main building for campus, but it's legit this amazing campus with all these really old, beautiful structures mixed in with a lot of very modern structures, which is a bit jarring when you first look at it, but as you go there, it becomes to be something that you love. Just like what was mentioned before, as a Marshall Scholar, you aren't just going over there to study. You are going over there to represent the United States. So I am in the military services, so I'm a captain in the US Army. I was a second lieutenant when I went to Scotland the first time. And so, you know, you have to keep in mind constantly, like, I'm going to dinners with, you know, His Royal Highness. I'm going to sit in the House of Parliament or in the Houses of Parliament and receive like a very in-depth lecture about the history of Parliament. We actually twice while I was there, we went and visited the devolved governments. So we went and visited the Welsh government, and they took us all around for a long weekend. We got to go and see a lot of really important parts of Welsh history as well as the Welsh government. We also got to go through the Scottish Parliament and do a similar type of trip as a group, representing the United States as well as the Marshall Scholarship. So you have to kind of be ready for that. You have to be ready for challenging questions about, well, exactly what, you know, was asked before, like, you know, why should my taxpayer dollars go to you? Particularly when you're looking at it from a devolved government perspective. When you are someone, you know, talking to someone who's pro-Scottish independence from the United Kingdom, how can you convince them that their tax dollars matter towards this amazing scholarship? You know, and then also just being an American in a different country, you have to represent this country honestly from your perspective. Just like what Dr. Kasten said, you are bringing your American story to people who don't know, who may or may not know much about America, or their relationship with America might be extremely limited or extremely negative in some cases. When I was going through my international law and security legal masters at the University of Glasgow, I got a lot of pushback from my fellow students because they knew that I was a soldier in the armed forces. And they were like, why would you ever do that? And they're coming through from it from a human rights perspective. But having those dialogues makes you a better scholar. It makes you a better student. It makes you more well-rounded. And it's a once in a lifetime experience to really engage with people outside of your comfort zone in a place that's not familiar, and have to defend your position, or maybe convince them of your position, or be convinced of theirs. Being open to those types of dialogues and discussions is a vital part of the Marshall Scholarship. Another thing that was absolutely amazing about my time was my class. If you get the opportunity to be a Marshall Scholar, get to know your classmates. Even if you guys are scattered all across the island, even if you've got, you know, someone up in Northern Ireland, someone in Southern Wales, get to know each other. Actually spend time. I spent my first winter holiday with about 16 of my fellow scholars, and I wouldn't trade that for the world, because we literally sat in a little house with the rain beating on it in Wales for about a week, and we just talked of the world. And having so many different other Americans with so many different backgrounds and perspectives was incredibly valuable to my life today and to the work that I do. And also I've maintained those relationships. We still do, you know, through COVID, we did group meetups on Zoom. And it was just like a breath of fresh air to reconnect with that group and see where everyone's at, see what they're doing, see how they've gone and done amazing things. I mean, I could not talk enough about how many people in my class are just doing incredible work in so many different disciplines, and really making big impacts. And just as valuable, I've still got, I've got friends who are still, pursuing a PhD in the UK. People who've done many different routes, but we have one thing that ties us together, and it's this experience. And it is absolutely worthwhile. Even if you don't think that your application is going to pass muster, or you don't think you're the right fit, get passionate about it and submit, because the worst that they can tell you is no, but at least you will have tried. And that's a really important part of this. And it's an important part of growth as a young student too. You've got to develop that getting comfortable in uncomfortable positions, putting yourself out there, being honest about your story. Because if you do get selected to be a Marshall Scholar, you'll be put in that position every single day. And it is one of the most valuable experiences of my life. I did want to say, I initially was supposed to go to King's College for my second degree, but I was able to convince the scholarship to allow me to stay in Glasgow for my second degree. And mainly just because, I loved Glasgow. I loved the place where I lived. I loved the Scottish people. Absolutely a second home for me. But also, I was going into a very different type of degree field. I was going from a primarily humanities, history-focused degree field with a Master's of Letters in War Studies to this legal master's in international law and security. And like I mentioned before, I got a lot of pushback from other students in that degree field, whereas in my previous one in war studies, I didn't get that. So it was a very going from one side of the spectrum to the other, and getting both sides of that was incredibly valuable. So I was able to convince the Marshall Scholarship to let me stay through talking them through that.
Dahlia, can you talk briefly about how your UK degree prepared you for your first master's in Glasgow? How difficult was it to transition academically?
It honestly wasn't that difficult to transition. The University of Kentucky History Department is a wonderful department. It might be relatively small compared to some other bigger universities, but I was very much challenged all the way through. The History 300 class, is I believe what it's still called, I had to write, I think it was 17 papers for that one class alone. And that really challenged me to get good at writing very, very quickly and be able to express myself very clearly in a way that was beneficial when I was looking at writing my application for the Marshall Scholarship. My history senior thesis, that was another example. I got to do a lot of really good research and get outside of my comfort zone when it came to that type of research, using assets beyond the university, beyond just what I could find in JSTOR, and digging into government websites and stuff to find the things that I needed. And I was really challenged by my professors to do that. And they were honest. They critiqued the heck out of my papers, and that was good for me. So I think that I was very well prepared coming out of the University of Kentucky for doing the application part of this. And then also I was in ROTC. So I got a lot of good leadership experience while being a cadet at the university. And again, getting outside my comfort zone. I hope that answered, Dr. Whitlow.
Yes, that did. That was very helpful. And I think someone else had a question. Did I step on someone else?
I wanted to jump in. This is Monica. I wanted to jump in and add on to a couple of points that Dahlia made, if that's okay. Yeah, so one thing that sort of Dahlia is encouraging all of you to apply, and I really I don't want to underestimate how much value gained just from writing the essays and preparing your application. I mean, this was actually a lesson that was taught me when I was a Truman Scholar at Kentucky before I was a Marshall Scholar. And I remember the faculty who were guiding that application process really hammered that home then, is that you gain so much clarity about your future and what you are aspiring to do and what you want to do by writing those essays. And you find out things about yourself you didn't even realize before you started writing those essays. So even if you don't make it past the first initial rounds, everything about it is going to enhance all the other future plans you have for yourself. And so it's an extremely valuable personal process to go through the application, regardless of what happens. I had a slightly different experience from Dahlia when I was a first year Marshall Scholar. I just wanted to, I was at the LSE for my first year, and it probably couldn't have been a more radically different schooling experience than I had at the University of Kentucky. And just as a heads up about the varied ways, I guess, in which the British education system can work. I mean, I remember going into my core class at the LSE, and the class met once a week for 1 hour. And that was all the instructional time that we had. We met with our tutor every week to turn in and talk about an essay. But the course gave you, on the very first day, you received a 40-page syllabus, and you were told to read what you want from this syllabus. We will be talking about this topic, but here are 50 articles that you could be reading to help you be knowledgeable about this topic. And then it was up to you to use your discretion to decide what you wanted to read and what you were going to learn from. And it was very independently focused in a way that took some adjustment of getting used to. And then there were no, even though you were writing essays along the way and they were being graded, those didn't contribute to your final grade. Your entire final grade was based upon the exam that you took in May at the end of the academic year. And so based upon what hodgepodge selection of articles you had decided to highlight and focus on out of that 40-page syllabus, you then sat down and wrote a day's worth of essay exams, sort of spilling out all the knowledge that you had acquired this year. And the expectation was that it was done incredibly independently, that you had I mean, it really is substantially less classroom interaction time with faculty than you're accustomed to getting in the United States. And that higher level of independent thinking was incredibly valuable. But I often think of my year at the LSE as in some ways being like my finishing school year, both because I had never had any economics classes and my program was very economics heavy at the UK, and I was spending a lot of time learning all the things that I needed to know in order just to be conversant in the language of my program, but then also just learning how to be that much more of an independent thinker and scholar, which I knew on some level that that's how it was going to be structured, but you don't really know until you're in that system about how different that feels on a day-to-day basis. And some schools in the UK are more like that and some are less like that. So I spent my second year at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, where you're in class for 4 hours a day, 4 days a week, and that you're having a much higher level of constant interaction, and you're doing weekly homework assignments, and you still had that end of the year exam structure, but it didn't feel as independently driven as the same way that it did at the LSE. And so some programs I think the LSE is much more like the Oxbridge system in terms of that independent we're going to point you in the right direction and expect you to find the way on your own. And that for me definitely took some getting used to. I benefited, but it wasn't what I was necessarily I had the tools and the intelligence to make my way through that, but it definitely requires you to sort of pivot a little bit from what you're used to.
Thank you, Dr. Grant. I really appreciate that you preach the gospel of filling out the application and everything that you learn from it, because I'm always talking to students about that. And I believe it. I don't think you can be in fellowship advising and not believe that. It's the true benefit in some way. I mean, the benefit of the award is, I understand that. But so many students get so much out of the process. And it's very, very valuable. And now what I'd like to do is take a few minutes before we open it up for questions. I just want to introduce you to Shemin, who is our newest Marshall Scholar. And I want to let her talk about her experience with the process, but also the programs that she is going to be pursuing starting in September, when she will be leaving for London. And so Shemin, can I turn it over to you?
Yes, hello y'all. So I started this application process, a year ago, almost. But actually, I think my story started in 2018. I was on Instagram, and one of my friends who had gone to Spelman had posted one of their friends saying that they just got into the Marshall program. And this was in 2018. I took a screenshot of it because I was like, what is the Marshall program? And I looked it up and I was like, I want to do this. I'm like, okay, let me see if I'm going to remember. But I saved that picture in my phone. And then last year, I'm talking to Dr. Whitlow, kind of trying to figure out what I'm going to do with my life. Plans had fallen through because of COVID. And so talking to Dr. Whitlow about the process, and it was definitely hard. A lot of sleepless nights, crying on the phone to some friends, but I had an amazing support system. I think that's one thing that's really, really important to reiterate, that having people around you that are going to push you to rewrite those papers and actually give you an honest opinion about what you're writing is so very important. I had some college friends as well as professors who were able to critique my work, especially those who were writing my recommendation letters. That was a really good source for me to utilize, but they were able to give me really harsh feedback that I needed to hear about my interviewing skills. I think I did about 4 to 5 practice interviews, some that Dr. Whitlow set up for me, and then others with some friends and family members, just really supporting me and having my back throughout the process, which was amazing. But now that I'm here, it still feels surreal. Dr. Casson was actually the one who called me to let me know that I'd gotten in. And I remember not recognizing the number and not going to pick up. And I was like, wait, this could be important. So I'm glad I picked up. But so it's a little bit awesome.
She might have screamed in joy. She might have.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I said she might have screamed in joy. She might.
Yeah. I blanked out that moment, honestly. I feel like I was like, what is happening? But it was so surreal and amazing. And obviously I'm like telling my mom and everybody and they're screaming. But I remember looking at like all the other Marshalls that had gone in, and I think what's awesome about my class is that we're the most diverse. So we're majority minority students, which I think is so amazing and something that I remember talking about in my application. What it's like being a minority student in a predominantly white institution, which UK is, and kind of, what this panel looks like, usually being the only person of color in the room, and how that experience has really helped me become a better leader, has pushed me to go outside my comfort zones, and how I'm going to be able to apply that in the 2 degrees that I've chosen to go into. So my first in global migration, I kind of got interested in that route because of my background, family background, being a refugee from Eastern Africa, and then that whole process of assimilating, coming to the US, and that process that my parents, went through, but then also doing research at UK and immigration and policy. So UK definitely prepared me, I think, for this application. A lot of the things that I was able to be involved in, I was in Chelgren early on, which is where I met Dr. Whitlow, who really encouraged me to apply for research positions, where I got to do research internships in the summer and then go and present that research in New Zealand, which Chelgren helped pay for, which was awesome. So I've gotten some really amazing opportunities by talking to professors and just staying connected with people even after I've graduated. You need those resources. Make genuine connections. Don't just go talking to every professor, but if it's something that you're actually interested in, reach out, ask those questions, and you'll get the support that you need afterwards. But I've gotten to meet my class of 2020 scholars. I've actually hosted 3 Zoom Hangouts with the 45 other scholars that I have in my group. And it's been really amazing getting to know every single one of them and have conversations and see the things that we have in common, our differences and different parts of the world. Creating a Zoom hangout when people are all over the world is one of the hardest things, but definitely teaches you how to be organized and be prepared for that. But it's been awesome getting to know everybody and seeing the different places they're going to be at. But one of the coolest things, going back to the Instagram moment that I had, I actually got to speak with Ariana, who's a 2018 Marshall, who inspired me to apply for the scholarship. Our mutual friend got us in touch, and we had a FaceTime call, and I was like, seeing your face, she's a woman of color, I'm like, seeing your face on that story, on the Instagram story, really inspired me to take that leap of faith and like believe in my worth and being in this space. And so it was just a full circle moment, and it was awesome. And she actually came and spoke for the first Zoom hangout that I hosted for my Marshall class, where she answered our questions about what it's like. And she deferred this year, so she'll be there in London this coming up year that I'm there. So hopefully I get to meet her in person, depending on the COVID restrictions. But it's just been a whirlwind, honestly, getting to be part of the process, learning about myself, and the thoughts I have at 2 o'clock in the morning about fixing my paper. I'm like, nope, you got to give it a break. But also the support that I have in my life, and being able to come and speak to other students about doing this and knowing how smart and capable they are of being in these spaces has just been a dream, honestly. So yeah, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask now.
Thank you so much, Shamin. I just want to say, getting to work with both Dahlia and Shamin was an amazing pleasure for me, and learning from them has been wonderful. And I'm so delighted and can't wait to hear about all your experiences that you will have this fall. But what I'd like to do is open it up now to the students who have been observing the info session. And I think you can feel free to unmute yourself and ask any question that you like, because you have a lot of expertise gathered here on Marshall. So are there any questions that people have about anything related to Marshall?
And feel free to type it in the chat if you're more comfortable doing it that way as well.
You can do that as well. Should have seated one of you. Is there someone there?
Yeah. Can you hear me well?
Wonderful. Thank you, Grace. Yes.
I was wondering, so when people are applying and they're applying for a program that may not be completely like related to their undergraduate degree, like if I am graduating in a degree that would, lead to speech language pathology graduate school, but I wanted to study like migratory studies or, research integration, would I be at a disadvantage, or would consider like that as a natural step?
Well, there's two things there. The first is that every British graduate degree will list specific requirements for entry. So you need to do your basic groundwork and make sure you're eligible before listing a specific program. And if you are, usually it'll say a couple things that might need to be translated. So in the UK, all students at all universities are actually judged objectively against each other when it comes to awarding them their final degree with what we might think of as GPA or summa cum laude or something like that. They all take a set of national exams which are independently scored. And if you're a mathematics student, you're taking with every single mathematics major in the entire country, and your exams are all scored, and the top bit of you get a first class degree. The next bit of you get a second class top tier, like it's called a 2-1. The next ones get a 2-2, and then the ones that just barely scrape by get a third. So you'll read that and you'll say you need at least a second class honors degree. And you'll say, what's that? Well, that does somewhat map onto US GPA. So you can kind of assume if you're meeting the Marshall criteria for a 3.7 GPA, you'll probably have at least the British equivalent of a 2.1, but it needs to have the set mandatory preparatory coursework. So if you're truly a SLP major and you've never taken, let's say, economics, and you're applying for migratory studies, they might say, economics is required, and you'd have to do that. You'd have to meet those. So for everyone listening, you'll write down what you hope to study, what programs you'd like to do. The Marshall does give you a little bit of a boost when it comes to admissions, but we certainly can't make a university admit you. So if a university reviews your application and decides that you don't meet criteria to join a particular course, that's okay. You don't forfeit your scholarship or anything like that. You will list backup programs in your application. And also sometimes students have a change of heart after they've won the award. They might decide something else is a better fit, and you can petition the commission and ask, can I do this other thing instead? And we can let you do that. That's very much true for the subsequent years. So you've seen like Shamin listed 2 masters. Well, she's been admitted, I presume, to her first one, right? at this point? Have you not yet? Okay, well, she's waiting. But the second one, she might really decide next year she wants to do something else. She might have, she wants to follow a particular rabbit hole or whatever, and that is absolutely fine. You are not held to your program of study by any means. So, if you write something that seems like speech language pathology to migration studies, well, I'm listening. I am all ears. What's the story there? How can you make a convincing case for this? Not just, I think it's cool, but more, what in your actual record and your actual accomplishments and interests can you point to objectively to say this makes sense?
Yeah, I want to second what Jennifer was just saying along those lines, that it's where that coherent narrative comes in. Like, why are you, with your background and your set of experiences and skills, destined to be in this program? Like, why is this the perfect fit for you? And so, like, those types of shifts in direction are totally acceptable, but you need to have the story behind it, that like, why does this pivot make sense for you? And why, like, not just are you doing that pivot, you, as Jennifer was saying, are you prepared for that pivot? And sort of like, how do the pieces fit together is going to be important. I can also, like, there are a few people in my class who did incredibly divergent first year and second year, because in the UK, master's degrees are 1 year, and most master's degrees are 1 year in length. So the majority of people going through the Marshall end up with 2 master's degrees, often from 2 different institutions, sometimes within the same institution. And like, one of my favorite cohort mates, he is currently a professor of sort of physics, theoretical physics at Caltech. He was part of the team, the long list of people who discovered the Higgs boson. He was one of those people, but he did theoretical physics his first year at Cambridge, and his second year he did drama at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts. And like, Marshall loved this. I mean, there's a clear, he had to make an argument for it, but people who have 2 different fully realized parts of themselves often make for the most interesting applicants in some ways as well. And so having divergent interests that are equally well represented in your background can often be a point of favor for you. But like, it's all about, you have to have the coherent narrative that fits it all together. And the other thing that Jennifer said, I'm another one of those people who I changed my second year plan once I was on the ground in the UK. I discovered somewhere along the way that I really wanted to be a demographer. And I was an anthropology major at Kentucky. I had a math minor. My advisors had no idea what to do with me as an anthropologist who loved math. And I realized somewhere in there that actually, like, if you put those 2 things together, it equaled demography, and I had found my dream home. And so I was able to explore that a little bit at the LSE. And then I realized that I can actually get a degree in this. And I just had to like walk 3 blocks down the road to the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and be at one of like the best places in the entire United Kingdom to be studying this. And so I worked with the Marshall advisors in London who administered the program then, and told them about my change, and they were really supportive of helping me switch. And I think I worked all this out in August, that I did not want to do the program that I had already applied to and been accepted to. And like, I remember though, like, once you have the Marshall in your hand and you're in the country, like, so many doors open up for you. So I remember like making an appointment to meet with the program of study. The deadline for applications had long since passed, and I basically like set this appointment, and I said, like, I really want to do this. I have full funding, and like, I think this is the best thing that I want to do. I'm so excited, enthusiastic. And he's like, sure, come on in. And they like let me in after the fact, like once I was on the ground with like the backing of Marshall behind me, that really kind of eased a lot of pathways open as well. So like, you have a lot more flexibility in your second year. Your first year needs to be incredibly well argued of what you're going to do, but the second year you can sort of completely change course and you can do things, but you need to just, in that initial year, in that initial plan, you need to be sort of, there needs to be a strong argument for how you're going and where you're going with that. So,
and I will say though, Monica's completely correct, but at the same time, no one is going to give you license to just fritter away all these taxpayer pounds.
Yeah.
So you have to do something.
It was
coherent.
important that that Mary Denyer agreed with me. Like I
Yes,
was Mary's first
right.
cohort coming
Yeah.
in, and she's still the Marshall administrator.
She
and I
is
was
still,
very,
yeah.
very lucky that Mary thought this was a good plan for me.
The
Yeah.
other thing that you might have read that we no longer do, we used to fund second bachelor's degrees, where you didn't need to have a background at all in whatever it was, and you could go over and do a second bachelor's degree condensed from the typical 3 years into 2. We do not do that anymore, so those applications we don't fund. And we also, we certainly fund PhDs. In the UK, a standard PhD is 3 years, and the Marshall Award is for 2 years with an option to extend to a third. So we do award PhDs with the tacit understanding that you'll probably be one of those people that automatically gets on to the 3rd year, unless your PhD absolutely goes south and you're not making any progress. However, PhDs in the UK are very, very, very hyper-focused. You know, unlike the US model where we have this sort of liberal arts model and we're taking all sorts of different courses, et cetera, in the UK, you are specializing from day one. You're just on one set course, as they call it, one set undergraduate degree. You're not taking courses in a wide variety of fields. So that means when you come to graduate school, particularly if you come to a PhD, the coursework bit of an American PhD is completely eliminated. There is no coursework. You start right into the research program. And so you have to be incredibly savvy and sort of ready to hit the ground in that field. So you could not apply for a PhD in migration studies without an undergraduate degree in migration studies. You could apply though for a top master's if you met all the coursework requirements. You could tell us a really good story.
Yeah, and I think that point that many people who are going into British PhDs, in the UK at least, the majority of people will have had one top master's as like the step into that PhD. And so there is an expectation if you're applying into a PhD program in the UK, and because you are going immediately into like writing your dissertation, is that you are coming from a really exceptional undergraduate training, that you are so on top of the board that you are ready to hit the ground running.
Yeah.
And so I mean, I think that's one reason why the majority of people apply through the master's programs rather than the PhD, because you really do have to be like at that level of performing as a graduate student from the very beginning that's there.
And a British PhD can be quite isolating, to be clear, because there's no coursework. You're just in your research program. I started a PhD, which I did not complete. I dropped out after the first year and decided to do a top master's for the second bit. And when I showed up at Oxford, my advisor said hello, and he said, right, so this is a PhD in the mathematical modeling of epidemics. Yep, good. They said, okay, how much calculus have you had? Well, I've had a lot. Okay, good. You need to go off and you need to go learn differential equations. I'll see you in January. Bye. That's how it was. And so, and that's not an extraordinary story. It's that independent and self-directed. So I said, well, all right. And I spent 3 months going to maths lectures and learning differential equations. And that's how it goes. So I think if a PhD makes sense for you and your life story, then absolutely apply for it, for sure. But just know that you will be like on your lonely island, and you should kind of think of it almost as the way a postdoc functions in the United States.
I mean,
And one thing I would say,
yeah. I mean, as someone who did a top master's in the UK and then got their PhD in the United States, like you will be head and shoulders above your, like the fellow applicants for US PhD programs. I mean, you will be able to hit the ground running and perform at a far faster level. And so like I was able to finish my in the US, a PhD usually takes about 6 years on average, depending on, I mean, more or less depending on your field, but somewhere in the 5 to 7 range. And I finished mine in 4 years because I was super ready and focused, and like I knew exactly what I was doing on a level that my classmates didn't. And so like it will open up many, many more opportunities for US graduate study afterwards. And a very large number of my classmates went on to graduate study in the US, either in PhD programs in the US or to law school programs in the US. And so like that's a very common pathway to follow.
and one of the things I would say to those of you who are hoping to apply for a Marshall is, that's one of the things that I would want to do with you, is discuss your program choices with you, and talk about some of these things, and have some of your faculty mentors at UK talk about it, because I have had students before come in to talk about a DPhil, which is what they would call it, and so a PhD in the US parlance, and probably students are not ready. And so we can talk about why that might be. And you've just had a great summary there, but we can take a closer look at it, and you may actually be able to find a master's program that actually suits you very well and where you are. And that's not to say that some of you aren't ready to go into the DPhil, but you need to be probably pretty narrow in your research interests already. The idea that you will go in and find what your research interest is not the way it works.
I mean, so I'm currently the director of graduate studies at one of the top sociology programs in the country. And I can say hands down that many of our graduate students who are amongst the most elite sociology graduate students in the country are not ready to handle, on day one, would not be ready to handle a British PhD. Because you have to have that, you have to enter with that such laser focused, and the preparation behind it is most people have finished a one-year master's before they start a DPhil program in the UK. And so it just because you're not ready for a British PhD program doesn't mean you're not ready for a US PhD program if that is what you see your future as being also.
Yeah, and to be clear, I don't want to dissuade anyone on this call who is thinking that this made sense for them. We absolutely love people who are interested in DPhils. We fund them every year. By all means, if it makes sense for you, it makes sense for you. But one thing that, you know, as I was saying, you've heard Monica and I both say over and over again, it's a very independent system. And we also are looking for applicants who are, you know, leaders and self-motivated and everything else. And so if you put together an application and it looks like you haven't even done the bare research necessary into what you're proposing to study, meaning the nuts and bolts and mechanics of your proposed program, are you eligible for it? Can you meet criteria for it? Does it make sense for you? And all the rest of it, you know, that obviously isn't viewed particularly favorably. So yeah, the thing about DPhils too is that they typically are, again, they're not broad. It's not like you're just admitted to Oxford history, done. You're admitted to work on a specific project being advertised by a specific faculty member. So you've already got your thesis topic essentially sorted out for you on the first day, which is so different from the American model. It's how you can finish in 3 years instead of 6. But just know that you're not going to have that wide-ranging exploratory phase where you really bone up and kind of become very solid in the foundations of your field. So if you're thinking that you are someone who might like to have an academic career, where you'd like to go on the academic job market, a British PhD where you only have 3 years instead of 6, where you're going to have a much more curtailed kind of exploratory phase and publication window is maybe a disadvantage, because you won't have time to put out multiple articles or present at multiple conferences, etc. All the things that Monica can tell you much better than I can, make you competitive on the US academic job market. So there's a lot that goes into program selection. That's the bottom line. And so a simple Google search where you say, yeah, that sounds good, it's probably not going to be enough. And your program, and again, how it feeds into your story is honestly about the most important thing in at least the screening phase of the applications that I can think of. You know, your interview performance itself is more heavily weighted, but we really want to see that there's been a huge amount of thought put into why you're applying for this scholarship.
And I think for the people who are applying for DPhil or PhD programs, it's not just that you have that question. Most people have already had months of conversation with their potential supervisor, and often have one of their letters of recommendation comes from the person who would be supervising their PhD research in the UK. And so it's already, this person has vowed that, like, I have already vetted this person in advance. I am thrilled. I want them to come, and please fund them for me, is often the way that works as well. And so, like, their essay for their academic program is that I'm going to work with this specific person on this specific topic. We've already been communicating about this. We have all these plans already in place, and it's extremely concrete in a way that it doesn't have to be that concrete for a master's program. I would also say that my friends who I know in my cohort who did PhD programs in the UK, because it's so hard to break into the US academic market with a 3-year program where you're not going to graduate with the publications you would be expected to have when you finished a US PhD program. Most of them are not practicing academics right now. So I can think of one person who was probably would have been one of the country's most brilliant chemists. He was this incredible chemist, and now he did his PhD at UCL. And then now he came back to the US and went to law school, and now he's one of the country's top patent lawyers, right? And so he channeled his scientific knowledge into like the law in that way, and he's doing incredible things, but he's not a practicing scientist. Another one of the people in my cohort who did a literature PhD or DPhil at Oxford when he was here, he is now one of the staff writers at The New Yorker, and he's the former past editor of Slate. But he went into more applied writing rather than an academic writing type of direction. And so I think because it's not as good preparation for the US job market, unless people are in the sciences where they are already slotting into a structured postdoc system in the United States, it's much, much harder for people in the humanities and the social sciences to sort of follow and stay on that academic trajectory when they come home.
But there's plenty of people, those two paths that Monica just described, there's plenty of people for whom that's the goal all along.
Yeah,
and the PhD
absolutely.
is just like a great opportunity to take a really deep dive into a topic and to learn how to write. And that's great. And that's fine. Like if that's your story, that's absolutely fine. Yeah, so I don't,
my guess is that the Marshall Commission is so much more excited with what they're doing with their lives than they are with what I'm doing with my life either. So
well,
like,
it's a hard thing because every time I ask that question about like why should the British taxpayer fund you, you have to turn it on yourself and you're like, I hope I was worth it, you know. It involves some self-reflection.
it is.
I'd like to ask one more question to have Dr. Kasten address for students who have pre-med interests. But also I want to mention, I know Dahlia, you had to leave, right? Have we kept you longer than?
Yeah, unfortunately. So it's 2:00 here in Arizona. So, and honestly, so like I'm in my uniform. I don't know if you can see it, but on the bottom half, I go back to work. So, but it was lovely to talk to all of you all. If you want to reach out, you have more questions, I'm on Facebook. Dr. Whitlow has all of my information, and I give her full permission to share. So please reach out if you do have questions, and best of luck. I hope you make it.
Thank you, Dahlia.
Everybody.
And also, I just wanted you, Dr. Kasten, to address this issue because I do get this. I don't know if the students who've hung with us today are pre-med, but I do have students who think about that. Like if I want to get my MD and come back to the US and do that, and I go and do a Marshall, this issue of doing a one-year master's. If they get accepted to the MD program and they defer. Can you talk about that a little bit, just so we have it on the record?
So I'm a real doctor. It says so on this path. I really am. And that's a fairly common path. I think probably 4 or 5 people a year are interested in that. So nearly all of the medical schools in the United States will let you defer if you're admitted, if you're applying to medical school in the fall of your senior year and simultaneously applying for these awards, you were to win one, you can still go through your medical school interviews, etc., and then just defer for 2 years. And of course, medical schools like it, and they think it's great, and it's obviously a big feather in your cap, and so that's wonderful. It in no way will throw you off anything in the US cycle. And we do have students every year too who apply as current medical students, usually looking to take a break between the preclinical years of medical school and the clinical years of medical school. As a doctor, I don't think that that's marvelous. I would say, you really don't want to break it up necessarily, but you certainly can without any detriment whatsoever. I would just say it's better to kind of go through your clinical years with the preclinical sciences fresh in your mind. But there's really no specific, like anything specific to medicine about the cycle. A couple things are slightly different in that the British academic year starts late in October, and a year-long taught master's might not conclude, and you might not have the degree awarded until September or so. And of course, US programs, whatever you're doing, be it more graduate school, law school, medical school, something else, usually will start in August. But again, it's just not a big deal. You'll finish up remotely. The degree will be awarded remotely. The pandemic has already brought a lot of these changes anyway, which will be permanent. that is actually something I wanted to say. I expect in the autumn that we're going to have hybrid interviews as a model, because we've always had a cohort of applicants that have been remote or overseas. We've had people doing Fulbrights or Peace Corps or some such thing, and they're in a very remote location, and they have to spend several $1,000s of their own money to come back to the United States to interview, and it's just a big hassle. We want to obviously curtail that, and if we can offer an interview in Burundi, we would like to be able to do that. That was randomly selected. So anyway, and of course, we don't know exactly what's going to be happening with COVID, and we might still have some restrictions that make hybrid interviews a good thing. I can tell you as the selection committee chair that there will be no weight whatsoever preferentially awarded to students who choose to interview in person versus students who choose to interview remotely for whatever reason that might be. We were all very pleased with how well the Zoom's format went for this year's interview. I think it was as on par or perhaps even superior to an in-person interview. The only thing that's different, unfortunately, is that you don't get to interview at the Consul General's residence in a very nice location in Chicago overlooking the lake. But besides that, it was very good. I think we had very substantive conversations. So again, if you choose for whatever reason to interview remotely, that's perfectly fine. The Marshal does cover the cost of your interview, so finances should never be a factor in your decision to apply. So they will fly you to Chicago and they will put you up and they will cover your food and your taxis and everything else. So never worry that you don't quite have it in the budget to apply and be a Marshall Scholar, because we definitely want everyone to apply with no barriers.
Final questions before we conclude. We stayed a little longer than I thought, but I want to make sure that we get any questions. And for the students who are still here, your questions are very helpful to students who will watch this later. So please feel free.
Hi, do you all have any recommendations regarding resources or places to do research into the academic programs that are offered?
Well, the best place to start is the website for the program. So they'll list the very basics, which will be, again, what are the entry criteria for this program? And then there'll be all the faculty who are affiliated with it. You can start reading about the faculty, look through their publications lists, basically say, are these people with whom I'd like to study? Are they doing things I find interesting? Are they writing things that I find interesting, and which, more importantly, the whole world seems to find interesting and are citing? Are these leaders in the field? Can you tell me, Brennan, what's your major?
So I'm doing a double major in computer science and economics, and
Okay,
probably
great.
hoping to do something with international studies in graduate school.
Okay, very good. So let's say you're going to do something with international cybersecurity. I made this up. So it'd behoove you to look at every single institution in the United Kingdom which has something to do with this, and really find what's the best. Because the best might not be Oxford, Cambridge, London. It really might be someplace that's a little bit more obscure, but is the best. And the more savvy you look and the more well-researched you look, the better that comes off in the interview.
To follow up on that, I mean, so one thing that sort of got lost a little bit in general, you really can get a master's in international cybersecurity in the UK. Like master's programs, because they're 1 year, are also very narrowly focused. And so you can find something that really speaks very directly to your niche interest in many cases. And so like looking around for something like that, like you might be surprised the types of programs that you can find and sort of the ways that they can really speak directly to.
Can I tell you my favorite one?
Interest.
My favorite one was an applicant who wanted to study, this was a real master's, automotive journalism, because he wanted to be the next Jeremy Clarkson. And that's a real master's, automotive journalism. Isn't that great?
Yeah.
It's unbelievably niche.
Yeah, but also, I mean, going to Jennifer's thing as well is you can talk to your faculty right now, like, I mean, and ask them if they're aware of who in the UK is doing really exciting work on this topics, and sort of seeing if they also have some familiarity. Some faculty do, and some faculty just, the UK is off their radars, but for many people, they do have some familiarity with where sort of the more exciting research is taking place outside of the US.
And you may read in some of your own studies, you may find that you read an article by someone at a British institution and you may want to look them up and see further if you're interested in. I mean, we're just pushing you into cybersecurity today, but if that happens to be your interest, we have a former UK student who did a Fulbright in cybersecurity, right, and is now working in Germany. So you can ask me too, because I know some of those resources. So, but faculty can sometimes, even if they don't know exactly, they may know, there may be another faculty member in the department that you haven't had a course with yet or something that they would say, go talk to that person because they may give you some guidance. So sometimes you have to kind of wind your way through your resources. The first person you ask may not have the information, but there will be people here who can give you starting points and make you feel more comfortable as you look at those programs.
That's why it's good that you're asking these questions in April and not in August.
That's
Yeah.
right.
So you have that time to explore.
Yeah.
That's right.
Well, and part again of being independent and self-motivated and everything is learning how and then doing tap into social networks and learn how to information gather in a way that involves humans as well as your own brain and Google. I'm so sorry, I've got some work stuff I have to go attend to.
Well, I'm so grateful. We've gone longer than I thought. So I am so grateful for all the time that our Marshall Scholars, our former Marshall Scholars, have been able to give. And so I'm delighted to be able to share this with other students. Thank you, Dr. Kasten, Dr. Grant. Thank you, Shamin. It's so good to see you. And for all the students who are here today, I really appreciate it. And I'll be looking at your names and probably following up with you. You can count on that.
Yeah,
Thank
and
you
you
all.
all can reach out to me and Monica. We are both involved in the selection process, but it is in no way a conflict of interest for you to run things by us. So feel free to do that.
Thank you, everyone. This was lovely.